The Green Bay Packers are heading toward the draft as the most underrated team in the NFL.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Locked On Packers today on a Friday. We are just a couple weeks away now from the NFL draft, and one of the Packers' potential favorite targets is not even going to have an athletic profile. Is he just not going to be a Packer? We got hints about the front they're going to run, all but confirmation about what Jonathan Gannon is going to do with this defense. But let's start here. I was seduced by clickbait, and I don't even want to address what it was, what the rankings were, where the Packers were, any of that. But it made me start thinking, because I've seen, even from people I respect, someone like Mike Tanier, about, the Packers are having this bad offseason. All these players are out the door. And we've debunked the issue with that. And the players that are coming in are, in many cases, like pretty clearly better than the ones that are going out. That's whatever. Just think about the end of last season. And look, I hesitate to even do this, but I think it's important. The injuries the Packers suffered, and then the way that they finished in the Bears game, and I understand they should have won that game, and they choked, and that matters, and we can't ignore it. But the Bears getting a miraculous win despite playing like crap, and then pushing the Rams, who had kind of run out of gas at the end of the season, despite Caleb Williams mostly playing like crap, has somehow turned the Bears into everyone's favorite team. And they're the team on the rise because they're the new hotness. They're really the post-2023 Packers, despite the fact that the 2023 Packers actually looked awesome in a playoff game before giving the best team in the NFL a run for its money on the road. But that's neither here nor there. I just want you to think about the players who were not on the field at the end of the year: Micah Parsons, Zach Tom, Tucker Kraft. Their defensive stalwart, their anchor, their star, the guy they gave up 2 first-round picks for, one of the 3 to 5 best defensive players in the NFL, not on the field in the postseason. Their best offensive lineman by a country mile, not on the field in the postseason. And their best offensive playmaker, not on the field in the postseason. And should they have lost 5 straight games without Micah Parsons? No, of course not. And they gacked 2 Bears games in that stretch. And they also, let's remember, gave up the Vikings game. If that game had mattered, the Packers would have tried to win it, and they would have. Okay? They gave the Vikings starters with their third string guys everything they could handle for a half in that game. Let's not forget, this team was 9-3-1 and had the AFC number 1 seed on the ropes before their season fell apart due to injury. And I'm not asking for anyone to feel sorry for the Packers. This is not about sympathy. This is not about what ifs. This is not about that. We're trying to decide who the good teams are. And even with an ugly loss to the Panthers, who turned out to be a playoff team, and an ugly loss to the Browns, the Packers were one of the best teams in the NFL, and they were making their case as the team to beat in the NFC in the third quarter on the road in Denver. And then injuries, like Christian Watson went to the hospital, for crying out loud. So let's engage in a thought exercise. Okay? Let's take the best playmaker, the best defensive player, and the best offensive lineman away from some playoff teams. Shall we? Shall we? Let's take Puka Nacua, Jared Verse, and Alaric Jackson off the Rams. Does that team even make the playoffs? And by the way, like, they still didn't go to the Super Bowl. They still barely beat the Bears. The Packers outplayed the Rams against the Bears, they're just not the same team. Of course. Of course. And I think you can make a pretty, and now I understand the Rams went out and they got Trent McDuffie. They signed Jalen Watson. Like, they've made their team better. But let's not act like last year they were without their best players going to be materially better than the Packers turned out to be at the end of the season. We have such recency bias when it comes to this stuff. Let's think about the Broncos. Let's give them back healthy Bo Nix. But let's take Cortland Sutton, Patrick Surtain, and Garrett Bowles off that team. How do they look? How do they look? They're not the one seed in the AFC if they have to play half a season like that, are they? The Packers had to play half a season like that and still made the playoffs and still really should have won that playoff game. It's even difficult to do with Seattle because they don't have the same star level talent, but take JSN, Charles Cross, and Devin Witherspoon off the Seahawks. Did they win the Super Bowl? No, they don't. They don't. Let's do it with the Bears. Let's take Colston Loveland, Jalen Johnson, and Darnell Wright, or probably, Darnell Wright, a more important player. Probably not their best offensive lineman, but if we want to try and do apples to apples, that's probably the way to do it. But let's take Joe Thuney off the Bears. Do they win a playoff game against the Packers? Absolutely not. They don't. The Packers are getting those players back, and it's like we forgot what they looked like in the middle of last year when they had those players. Now, I understand with Micah Parsons and Tucker Kraft, they lost to the Browns. With their guys, now Tucker Kraft got hurt during the Panthers game. And there were plenty of weeks where they didn't look like a great team, where there were inconsistencies and all those things. But how can we sit here and not act like those three players are not essentially free agent acquisitions for the Packers this offseason? And that's before we account for the fact that Zaire Franklin is just a straight up better player than Quay Walker. Rasheed Walker, that deal ends up being 1 year, $4 million. He got Yash Nyman's contract in Carolina. That tells you what the league thought about Rasheed Walker. They think he is a sub-replacement player, that he is not a starter. And he was the Packers starter. Jordan Morgan is going to be better than Rasheed Walker. And, Matthew Golden for Dobbs replacement, we don't need to rehash all of that. But it's more important that Tucker Kraft is coming back. And yes, they traded Rashawn Gary, and yes, they traded Colby Wooden. It's more important that Micah Parsons is coming back. And yes, they're shuffling the offensive line and they're bringing Sean Ryan back, and he's never been the preferred starter at center. And Anthony Belton has not been the preferred starter at guard for more than half a season. And Jordan Morgan has never played left tackle in the NFL in games that matter. It's more important that Zach Tom is coming back. And yet people they seem to forget. They seem to forget how talented this team is. Now, the markets don't, because they view the Packers in a tier below the Seahawks and the Rams, in an Eagles, 49ers, Lions tier. I don't understand the love for the Lions. I think the Lions are gonna more likely stay where they were last year than they are to take a big step forward. I really don't see the case for them. I don't understand. They're favored in the NFC North in some places. That doesn't make sense to me at all. This Packers team was on their way to being the favorites in the NFC before Zach Tom, Christian Watson, Evan Williams, Micah Parsons all went down when Tucker Kraft was already hurt. If a couple of those guys stay healthy, and I've been saying all along, if just Zach Tom plays against the Bears, the Packers win. If just Tucker Kraft plays against the Bears, they win. If just Micah Parsons plays against the Bears, they win, much less all three of those guys. And they're not playing that game in Chicago if some of those guys had been healthy down the stretch for the Packers. If Micah Parsons is playing in that second Bears game, the Packers win. If Tucker Kraft is playing in that second Bears game, the Packers win. That's not what happened. But let's not forget how good those players are. Micah Parsons was second in Defensive Player of the Year voting for most of the year, ended up being third despite the fact that he missed almost half the year. Tucker Kraft was on his way to be All-Pro. To be All-Pro 1. If he keeps doing what he was doing for a full season, he was going to be first team All-Pro. And he didn't get a chance to do that. Well, he's going to be back this year. And even if he's not All-Pro level, he's going to be really freaking good. And he's going to make this Packers team a lot better. They are serious contenders in the NFC. And when it's all said and done, they are going to be in the tier with the Rams and the Seahawks. And I make the case, given all the Seahawks have lost and the little replacement that they have, that it really should just be the Rams in their own tier right now. I think that would be a fair thing to do. And then you put the Seahawks and the Packers in that next tier. And I would put the Seahawks and the Packers in their own tier, especially since it looks like A.J. Brown's going to get traded. I don't know what to make of San Francisco or Detroit. It's the Packers and the Seahawks to me in a tier by themselves. And the league doesn't, the markets anyway, don't seem to agree. Now, we got some clarity on some schematic things that the Packers are going to do this year because of the way they announced their coaching staff. I'll tell you what I mean. Welcome to the 5-Hour Energy Flavor Draft with 18 flavors to choose from, including new options like Confetti Craze, Fruity Rainbow, or Cotton Candy. There's something for everyone. The board is set, the flavors are ready, and I've got my number one pick for the 5-Hour Energy Flavor Draft. Look, I've been all season, I've been on Hawaiian Breeze, but I will tell you, I am very tempted by the peach mango. You get that tropical depth, the sweetness. There's a smooth, rounded fruit profile. And some of the citrus flavors, they're a little thinner. You get that richer, creamier mouthfeel with the peach mango, with that sweet, aromatic finish. Ooh. Just makes me feel like warm weather is here, even though it's not quite here yet. Find your new favorite flavor of 5-Hour Energy shots available online at 5hourenergy.com or on Amazon. College basketball is nonstop. Big games, tight spreads, momentum swings every single night. How about 5-12 upsets? What's up, High Point? From early tip-offs to late-night West Coast shootouts, there's always action on the board. I'll be honest. These late tips, it's a struggle for me. I have kids. It's hard to stay up that late. But that doesn't mean I can't lay a little money down and wake up and see, hey, cash that one. Now FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. You can build any college hoops parlay you want. Rivalry games. We could get some rivalry games later in the tournament. Like I love a Final Four where it's like, ooh, we got conference rivals or we got blue blood rivals. That's the good stuff. That's to me, that's as good as a 13 beating a 4 or a 15. Maybe not a 15 beating a 2, but maybe because usually those games are better. Mixed spreads, totals, and player props to match how you see the slate playing out. Go safe, go bold. Ride with the team you've been following all season. It's your parlay, your style, now with more upside to it. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. The Packers officially announced their coaching staff, and they made some additional hires. Another, QC, offensive coach that you've never heard of that has some background on the Shanahan tree. And we don't really know the impacts. We don't really know the quality of those coaches. I'm not going to pretend like we have good information there. But the way it was announced, DeMarcus Covington, who was the defensive line coach last year in an even front, a 4-man front, is now, in addition to being the assistant head coach, is an outside linebackers coach, which all but confirms the Packers are going to be running an odd front. It's going to be a 3 base down front. And that was what I had assumed all along. Like, I didn't quite understand this idea of like, oh, what is Jonathan Gannon going to do? What do you mean? He's going to run the defense. He's been running. I know they made some tweaks last year and they did some weird things and they played a college style of offense, but like, the 4-2-5 is really just a 3-4 in a nickel look. And look, I have been on record saying I think the schematic differences are overrated. Is now that discussion is now overrated, because I do think 3-4 teams care about certain things more than other teams in the way that they prioritize edge flexibility. I think size matters. I know everyone's in nickel most of the time, but I bet if you looked at the players playing edge in a 4-3, they are heavier on average than the teams with 3-4 pedigrees. And I would guess, it'd be interesting to look at, I would guess the teams that are odd fronts, that are these 3-4 teams, have more and bigger defensive tackles than the 4-3 teams. Now, that's not to say you can't be a 4-3 team and have a 340-pound nose tackle. That is a thing that happens, and that is a thing that has happened for a long time. I don't want to pretend like that's not the case. But a nose tackle, if you're going to play an odd front, is going to be a little bit more important on early downs. Now, it's maybe less important for Jonathan Gannon because I expect significantly less true base defense from the Packers this year than with Jeff Hafley. Jeff Hafley was not afraid to get in that 4-3 with 3 true off-ball linebackers on the field and play it that way. I do not think we are going to see a ton of reps where the Packers have 3 true defensive linemen on the field and 2 true edge players. There may be situations where they play 3 defensive linemen, if you want to call them that, and an edge in that 4-2-5 look on like 2nd and 8. They might go to nickel, but it might be, we normally think of big nickel as the safety. It's a 3 safety look, and the Packers will certainly do that. They already their base nickel is kind of already that nickel because Javon Bullard is a safety by trade. But they may run some big nickel, quote unquote, with 3 defensive linemen. Maybe you find a defensive tackle in the draft that is big enough that he plays, what is essentially like 5 technique, plays a little bit wider. You get someone like Kristen Miller, who's 6'5", 310. They don't have to be your nose tackle. They don't have to be your 3 tech. They could play a little bit of end. There are some defensive tackles in this class that could do a little bit of that. If you find someone that's got that sort of versatility, Kristen Miller might not be the perfect example here, but I certainly can think of some guys who, in the NFL at least, someone like Calais Campbell has played on the edge and as a defensive tackle. Calais Campbell, still on the market. So that could be someone that could give them that additional flexibility. To me, this was just like never really a question that this is what the defense was going to look like. And I don't mean to be condescending in that way. I found it interesting that there were all these questions. Like, oh, what is he going to run? What is he going to run? Like, we kind of know what he's going to run. And Micah Parsons, yes, he is a more appropriate player as a 3-4 outside linebacker, as a stand-up defensive end. I think he makes more sense, technically an outside linebacker, right? But remember, the Packers drafted Lucas Van Ness when they were playing a 3-4. So I don't think they're suddenly going to move him inside because of the scheme change. They might move him inside because Bobby Babich and or Jonathan Gannon want to see him in a different alignment, and they need some depth along the defensive front. But they would also need some more edge players in order to make something like that work. You could play Lucas Van Ness with his hand in the dirt. It's not uncommon to see 3-4 teams allow edge guys to play with their hand in the dirt if they're more comfortable doing that. And it's not uncommon for 4-3 teams to allow edge players to stand up if they're more comfortable doing that. And so I don't think this really changes. I don't want to step on. We're going to get the questions on the Friday news dump tomorrow. I don't think the confirmation of this information is material to the way the Packers are going to approach the draft. In fact, we talked, I think it was before the Packers hired a new defensive coordinator. I wrote about this and we talked about it on this show. Brian Gutekunst does not care. Mostly does not care. Ted Thompson seemed to care. He would cater more to the whims of the scheme and, hey, we want to get smaller. We want to get, be a more penetrating, gap shooting front, those kinds of things. Brian Gutekunst doesn't seem to care. He wants big, strong, fast. He wants premier athletes And coaches, that's your job to figure it out. Because he drafted a primary man corner in Eric Stokes for his own scheme. Like, Rashawn Gary is not ideally suited as a 3-4 outside linebacker, although his best football was as a 3-4 outside linebacker. But he played as a hand-in-the-dirt player at Michigan, playing 4-eye. Like, he's more suited at that time to be a 4-3 defensive end. Guess who didn't care? Brian Gutekunst. Now, we can quibble over the wisdom of that. That's not at issue here. The question is, does the fact that they're going to be a 3-4 team versus a 4-3 team change the outcomes of the kinds of players they're going to look for in the draft? I just don't think it does, with one exception. I do think nose tackle is just a more important position for a 3-4 team than it is a 4-3 team. Because it's going to just be him more often as the guy. You're not going to have two guys along the interior trying to muck things up. It's you. It's the nose tackle. And there are going to be times when it's like you've got a guy walked up and he's the other interior defender. Like the college stuff is crazy, and Jonathan Gannon has done some college stuff and it is crazy. But I think you need a nose tackle, which is why I think the Packers are kind of waiting to see how the draft plays out. We're going to talk about this on the Sunday OT. But I think that they are going to be comfortable waiting to see how the draft plays out. If they can get someone early, they will not feel obligated to go out and add in the draft. But if they can't, and they can only get that day 3 run stuffer, maybe that's when they call a DJ Reed or a Calais Campbell, some of these older players, and then they'll see post June 1, what shakes loose? Who's going to be out there for them? Now, one of the players that I mentioned earlier, Kristen Miller, he is one of my favorite players in this draft class. He is my favorite defensive tackle in this draft class. And I don't think the Packers are going to draft him. I'll tell you why next. What if sports were traded like markets? Now you can put your sports IQ to work in real time with Robinhood Prediction Markets. It's not you against the house. It's you participating in a live market. You can buy or sell your positions live all game long. Use your sports knowledge in the moments that matter. Robinhood Prediction Markets changes the game. It's people moving the action, so when momentum shifts, you can move with it. I always knew the game, but never had a dynamic way to apply that knowledge. Now I can actually take part live in a market powered by the people. You're no longer just a spectator. Play by play, you decide. Trade every play with Robinhood, now available across the U.S. Download the Robinhood app now to begin. Futures and cleared swaps trading involves significant risk and is not appropriate for everyone. Event contracts are offered by Robinhood Derivatives, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant and swap firm. I think Kristen Miller is the best defensive tackle in the draft, and we are going to have a Goodies Guys episode on him coming up because we don't have an athletic profile for him. We're not going to get an athletic profile for him, it sounds like. And I think that might legitimately take him off the board for the Packers, at least at 52. And I've said it before, and I will repeat it here. The Packers have not, under Brian Gutekunst, drafted a player in the top 50 without an athletic profile. And without a pretty complete athletic profile, not just like height, weight, speed. I'm talking jumps or shuttles, cones, something. Usually it's height, weight, speed, jumps is the minimum of what you're going to get in an athletic profile for a Packer pick in the top 50. 52 is just outside that. And I understand they drafted Josh Myers, who was hurt in a COVID year, in a peak pandemic quarantine draft. They drafted a player who was injured and did not work out and did not have a full athletic profile. That is the one time. Look, I don't think it matters yes or no on a player the way that he tests. Like if Kristen Miller turned out to be a 75th percentile athlete, that would not materially change my opinion on Kristen Miller. I think the tape speaks for itself. He is a damn good football player. And especially if he's like if he's a 75th percentile athlete for a defensive tackle, given his size, you weight adjust it. That's probably really good. That's probably even better. And that probably puts him right in the range. Now, if he's a 35 percentile athlete, if he's Lee Hunter, it's just not going to happen. And I don't think it would be wise for anyone to just say, well, they don't have an athletic profile or they have a bad athletic profile. They're not going to be a Packer. We've seen the Packers buck trends on this stuff in the past. They didn't draft a linebacker in the first round for years until they drafted Quay Walker. They didn't draft an older player in the first round for years until they drafted Devontae Wyatt. So there's always exceptions, but the exceptions generally prove the rule. And so when you don't have a first round pick, you are in a situation where you have to be even more judicious with the swings that you take in the second and third rounds, because yes, your first round pick is technically Micah Parsons, but this is the highest pick you're going to get. The best pedigreed player you're going to draft in the 2026 draft is happening at 52. Can you afford to not have it be an evaluation that you have stamped with an athletic profile? Because that is what an athletic profile is. I want to be very clear about this. The tape is always the first and most important thing. But a draft prospect is a risk profile. And what you want to be is sure. You want to be sure about what you're getting. And when you have a player profile on tape that matches the statistics and the indicators and the grades, and that matches the athletic profile, that is when you can be most confident in your evaluation. If you are looking at things and all the boxes, you go, okay, he looks really athletic on tape. Okay, that's good, right? He stamps it. You don't get to count it twice. You don't, oh, he's got a 9.5 relative athletic score. Okay, cool. That doesn't count extra. If he looks athletic on tape, you are stamping that eval. Okay, he looks athletic on tape. It turns out he is athletic sometimes with pass rushers, for example. They can look like they have a good first step, but what they're really doing is just jumping the snap. An opposing team or a lot of opposing teams, they always go on the same cadence, or they most of the time go on the same cadence. And so they kind of know when the ball is going to get snapped and they're jumping the snap. They don't actually have that sort of first step quickness. And oh my goodness, they ran a slowish 40 and they had a bad 10-yard split. Well, it's because they're jumping the snap. They're not actually explosive getting out of their stance to go rush the quarterback. Well, that adds an element of risk to their profile. I love some of the advanced numbers and some of the indicator numbers that you get with receivers, for example, yards per route run against man, some of the sticky quarterback numbers, performance from a clean pocket, those sorts of things. Okay, the tape says they're really good, really accurate. When they can just stand in there, stand and deliver, they're really good. Hey, you know what? The numbers say from a clean pocket, they are elite. Well, what if the numbers say from a clean pocket, they're just okay? Okay, was I being seduced by a couple really good throws? Was I being seduced by one game? You're introducing some doubt. You're introducing some risk to the profile when everything does not line up. Now, that's not to say that doesn't make the tape any better or worse. It just adds an element of risk where you go, okay, maybe you do need to go back to the tape. Maybe the tape shows something else and you need to see it through a different lens. But also maybe things just don't line up the way that you think they should all the time. Well, if that's the case, trust your instinct to say, well, that doesn't seem right. And that adds an element of risk. And it may be percentile points. It may be fractions of percentiles. Where you go, okay, we're 94% sure about this player. You should never be 94% sure about a player, but this is for instance. And it may make you 92%. You just, I'm a little less sure about that player now. And when you have no first round pick, you have to be sure about it at 52. And I'm in a position now where if the Packers do not bring in Kristen Miller for an interview at which time they could ask him to test. It's not unheard of to bring a guy in and say, be ready. We're gonna make you do the drills. So train up. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But if they don't bring Christian Miller in for at least an interview, whether they work him out or not, I just think he's off their board. I really do. Now, if for some reason he's there at 84, at that point he's worth the risk, but I would take him at 52 and not have a problem with it. I don't think the Packers are going to feel the same way. I really don't. At least history tells us that they will care and they will go in a different direction. And that's when you hope that there's a corner that they love. There's someone there that they love that allows them to make that with, in good conscience and in good faith. But we'll see. All right, we've got the Friday news dump coming. We're going to go a little early on Friday. I have my parent teacher conferences. So we're gonna go more like 11:45 Central Time on Friday. We'll get another prospect profile out. I think we're going to do Christian Miller on Friday. So that's going to come out in a little bit. Be ready for that. And then we'll have our Sunday OT on Sunday, getting you ready for the next phase of the off season. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google, Amazon. Follow me on the social medias. Follow the podcast on the social medias. Always putting out clips, having a good time doing that. And if you're someone who listens to the podcast every day or almost every day, the Everyday Club is built for you. Go to lockedonpackers.supercast.com to get ad-free access, plus join the group chat. So for those of you on video, we said you did the first ever 24/7 national NFL YouTube channel. On audio, make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft, and always stay Locked On Packers.